demonstration. Silent flight display flying.
Really good. I said that I wasn't.
And there it is, being cast off.
Breaks up a little bit more, it sounds like it's great.
I look at it and I'm like...
Hey man, look, can you see it? Where is it?
Were you out yesterday? Oh yeah, no, it was with you.
Yeah, there's another wrong one.
This next type we're going to see in today's show, in from the right, the Yakovlev Yak-3UTI It was a crucial engagement for the Soviets in gaining the upper hand against German forces. A very hot ship, this aircraft, pretty short-ranged, but very effective in combat. Much has been made over the years of the Luftwaffe supposedly ordering its fighter pilots to not engage Yaks in lower-level dogfights, but that's possible. Began in earnest in the summer of 1944, Warbirds in particular gained fame on the Yak-3. were looking to diversify. Now their large guaranteed military orders were no longer going to be coming in. Yakovlev thought there was a market in the proved right. Bob Davey there in the Yak-3 UTI PW. Contemporary German fighters also being used in the likes of the Messerschmitt Bf-109G or the Focke-Wulf FW. Quintessential sounds of Between the Walls and Me.
Bristol Aeroplane Company responded to that challenge with a prototype that they called the Type 142, an aircraft with a top speed of over 300 miles an hour. It quickly became clear that this 8-seat twin-engined aeroplane was faster than any fighter in the Royal Air Force Infantry at that time, and that, unsurprisingly, caught the attention of the Air Ministry. They quickly ordered an initial batch of 150 of this new type, modified to a light bomber specification. This was the result, the Blenheim, and it made its first flight in June of 1936.
Potential seen in this aeroplane as a new long-range fighter. And so they began to be equipped with a ventral gun pack of 4.303-inch Browning machine guns to augment standard armament. And that's the configuration we see this one in, Mk.IF, F for fighter. And when Britain declared war with Germany in September 1939, there were nearly 1,100 Blenheims in service. That was more than any other aircraft type. And Blenheims were involved in some of the earliest actions of World War II over Germany. Was very much a portent of things to come. But nonetheless, Blenheim crews in all theatres fought on gallantly. And as that Blenheim departs, that aircraft pays tribute to the efforts of all Blenheim crews during World War II.
Now it is the Westland Lysander that we see, an aircraft that was developed for the Army cooperation role to replace the Hawker Hector. Gear that could double as mounting points for Browning machine guns.
And that really unusual wing design was as a result of experience in the Army cooperation role passed on by pilots already flying. For that purpose, Replicas, artillery spotting and reconnaissance.
Yes, it looks from some angles like a gull wing design, but it isn't.
Really became a boom when Lysander started to move away from its army cooperation routes and most famously became the primary aerial support platform for the SOE, the Special Operations Executive. Numbers 138 and 161 squadrons were stationed at Newmarket and at Tempsford, just north of the aerodrome here at Old Warden. They completed more than 400 operations, delivering SOE agents into and recovering them from occupied units. Short landing sites as an absolute night.
Yes, just a compass, a map, and the light of the moon to help them. And so those missions normally occurred around the time of the full moon, so that at least would provide a little ambient light.
And then when they got to the landing sites, hopefully members of the French resistance would have laid out some torches next to the strip to help guide the Lysander pilot in, of course. And the last of our Mercury trio, the Gladiator. Like a good aircraft from history, the Gladiator started out as a private venture. It wasn't developed against any official requirement, but the RAF adopted this derivative Gloster gauntlet as an interim measure while it awaited the new monoplane fighters.
Served with the Royal Air Force, and it continued to serve into the Second World War.
Yes, Malta's the one people most remember. It was a flight of there were more sea gladiators at their disposal. The famous three, immortalised as being dubbed Faith, Hope, and those gladiators, those sea gladiators, were more effective against Italy's biplane fighters, the Fiat CR-43, CR-42s and CR-32s, than they were against more modern German and Italian monoplanes. the 20 minutes or so from the 3 Bristol Mercury-powered RAF combat aircraft of the late peacetime and early war period. And following on from the Blenheim, which was flown by John Gowdy, as I said, we had in the Shuttleworth Lysander, and they're landing on Paul Shakespeare with the Gloster Gladiator. Cabin pilot. This particular Flamant flying at a British air show. It comes to us from an organisation with a rather long name, the Amicale Alençonnaise des Avions Anciens, whom I hope you'll all forgive me for referring to henceforth as A3A, which is rather easier to get the tongue around. This is now several mistakes the MD-311, that was the Navigator and Bombardier trainer. They were delivered to the French military from 1949 to 54. 25 of them went to the French Navy, the rest to the Air Force. That conducted the first operational use of the AS-11 and SS-11 wire-guided anti-tank missiles attacking separatist forces holed out in caves. Service alone.
Yeah. flight radar. Yeah, flight radar will tell you that. Yeah, well, how would it tell? No, not flight radar. Yeah. Take it back, take it.
It still is, and private companies were not necessarily flavour of the month politically at that time in France. So Dassault wasn't favoured for mass production of the Flamant despite it being their design.
Thankfully, organisations like A3A in Alençon keep the fire burning into land. The MD312 Flamant. And so many thanks to Nikash Coffin for bringing that aircraft over from France and displaying it for us this weekend. Lovely stuff. Reproduction. This is one of the privately owned aircraft based here at Old Warden. It's owned by Andrew Wood. Very fast, sporting two-seater, and that's it named the Dove. Story short, very often the Dive is described as simply a civilian version of the Sopwith Pup, but the two are actually quite different, and the Dove can be seen to share several design features with the later Sopwith Snipe. However, it was still a very agile machine, hoping, no doubt, to appeal to ex-World War I military pilots, amongst others, to the two tandem seats. Shuttleworth connection, I should say, with the Sopwith Dove, because one captain of their friends has been used of it enough to count as a flight in his logbook. Sopwith's chief engineer, Herbert Smith, began developing the triplane in April 1916, the first prototype was ready and had flown by the end of May, and pretty soon afterwards it went over to France.
During its evaluation flights, its success and its potential was proven. Within just 15 minutes of arriving, it was put to use intercepting enemy aircraft. Yes, the triplane got especially heavily armed, and it also suffered from other problems as well. It was very tricky to repair. The fuel and oil tanks were inaccessible without dismantling the wings and fuselage, so even minor repairs couldn't be carried out by ground crew on the front line.
In the opinion of some historians, was dissatisfaction with the triplane head. Soviet and Russian aircraft was optimised for operation in the sort of harsh climates they have to fly in over there. The Miles Hawk Speed 6 getting airborne underneath. Simple design in many ways, the Yak-52. The series production of the 52 was all carried out by the Aerostar company in Romania, starting in 1978.
It's one of just 3 Hawk Speed 6s that were built, these thoroughbred, purpose-built racing machines.
I'll bring this back and I'll say goodbye. I'm not going anywhere.
Rarely is an aircraft designed for such a specific purpose as the Comet. Everything about this aircraft was designed and built with one mission in mind, the Robertson Air Race.
So named after its main sponsor, Sir Macpherson Robertson, who put up all the prize money. It was to start in England and finish in Australia, celebrating the centenary of the city of Melbourne and the state of Victoria. There would be the rules were pretty loose. No limit to the type or power of the aircraft. And to be classified as a finisher, you had to reach Melbourne within 16 calendar days.
Maximum speed and efficiency. At the wings.
I remember he was on squadron.
I said it's a challenging aircraft in some respects, but what a beautiful example of landing a machine that's pretty difficult to get back on the ground. By Dodge Bailey. And it was incredibly advanced and high performing for that time. It has all metal stressed skin construction, which was a big step forward when you think that steel tube construction and canvas covering was still the norm. It was in its class by some margin, and they set several records between the wars, notably in the hands of one of Germany's leading female aviators, Ellie Beinhorn, the wife of the Auto Union Rosamund.
It kind of disappeared.
Achieved its first major success.
No, fine. It's just a prelude to Raven Hitler to try all this stuff, isn't it? Prelude to the war.
In large part by Kurt Tank, the new aeronautical engineer that's been taken on by Focke-Wulf, who was far more experienced in that role than any of his predecessors have been. The development of Stieglitz occurred under his leadership. In its first flight in 1932, conceived used, of course, the C-47 Skytrain in huge numbers, especially during the major air forces operations for the latter part of the war. The C-53 Sky Trooper was a para-dropping version of that. They called it the R4D, and the first of it arrived in service in early 1942. They went on to buy about 600 of them in wartime. Just 5 days after America entered World War II with the attack on R4Ds. As a result, they often operate significantly overloaded, always an operator unarmed.
Is it the bitter end, mate? Yes.
is it here? Well, the answer comes in the Navy to Victory Tour, which has been arranged this year to mark the 80th anniversary of the D-Day. Also celebrates the 90th anniversary of the first flight of the DC-3, the centenary of engine manufacturer Pratt & Whitney, and students they have travelled over with this aircraft as it comes over to commemorate the end of World War II in Europe. Hopefully there'll be an actual presentation of those runnings to British authorities towards the end of its tour. It really has brought boys back home. It's also providing a great deal of entertainment at British air shows. We're delighted to have it here at Old Warden. The last of 4 this season into land from the Dallas to the Air Force. The R4 success. What an absolutely brilliant display of the R4D by the crew headed by Kurt Lewis.
Just put them on the floor. Or put them on one of the seats. Because you're not going to be very long, are you?
First enemy contact was by another unit, number 84 Squadron, based out of Horn Island off Queensland. That was in May 1943. They drove off a trio of Japanese Mitsubishi G5M Betty bombers, but they scored no kills. That wasn't a situation. Smoke bombs
T6 DNA.
Power Squadron were formed within the RAF. He escaped to London via Sweden. Slovak squadron during wartime. Today, they're both markings. Escape across the Channel to Britain in June 1940. He joined the RAF. A year later, he went on to shoot down 6 enemy aircraft.
compromise between the size of the propeller and the maximum sensible length of the landing gear legs. The result is a strange note on the ground and a distinctive inverted rolling design.
One of the most important US Navy fighters and fighter bombers of World War II, used significantly by the Royal New Zealand Air Force in World War II as well here at Fort War. Rolling out after a spellbinding performance in the F4U 5NL Corsair, Bernie Deal and an Hispano Bouchon, now under restoration. And they're having cooled the engine for a bit. The Shuttleworth Spitfire coming into land. The other Spitfire, the Mk.IX of Lillum Aviation, was flown by Jim Schofield, and at the controls of the Mk.V there was the Shuttleworth chief pilot Paul Stone, who also planned that whole magnificent sequence.
Oh, it is the Shuttleworth.